Good afternoon and welcome to another Clearwater Jazz Holiday Foundation's Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. I am your host, Michael Carnodal, and I'm delighted today to have an awesome educator and musician, Dr. Pete Carney. And this topic today is jazz band arranging for band directors and advanced students, part one. I know, buckle up, all you band directors. I know this is what you've been waiting for. Whether your classroom is set up a little weird and you have to arrange things different, or maybe, you have that tune in your head for the longest time and you want to get it out and arrange it the correct way. I think we're going to get the information we need today. But before we start, I want to make sure everyone knows that they can always check out our past archive sessions, and keep in mind, they're free. Share this information. That is free, awesome information. You can get this at clearwaterjazz.com/education. And this wouldn't be possible without our awesome sponsors. So please be sure to check out those studio archives. And that's brought to you by Blue Water Wealth Management at Stewart Partners and Duke Energy, as well as check out our Young Lions podcast available wherever you stream. And that's brought to you by our friends at Marine Max Clearwater. Just search Young Lions Jazz Master Virtual Sessions. If you've never heard Dr. Carney before, he's brought us some great sessions. Just to name a few, building a good solo, that was awesome. How about improvising over Stella by Starlight, negotiating difficult chord changes? I mean, you name it, he's given us some great sessions. And if you don't know him, he is the director of jazz studies at State College of Florida in Bradenton. So you can also see him on many stages throughout Tampa Bay and throughout the country. Like I said, he is a dynamic saxophonist. And he has some awesome students. He has previously given lectures on Radiohead and jazz at the National Jazz Conference, and given a TED Talk on designing curiosity in music education. And locally, like I said, he's well known. And he also has a textbook, Interactive Listening, and that was chosen by Apple as editor's choice. So without any further delay, Dr. Carney, the stage is all yours.
Thanks for the intro, Michael. I got some great stuff to talk about. It's sort of the fifth element of you being a jazz person is your writing skills. I know it's easy to sort of overlook, but it definitely defines who you are to other people. And it's a great way to express your knowledge on paper in a way that helps your ensembles get better. There's no perfect ensemble, there really is not. Like, I feel like the more I learned about arranging, the more you start tampering with stuff and making it work for the group that you have. So I wanted to talk through, in this, we're going to do this in two sessions, I think. And then this first session, I wanted to talk about fundamentals of ways to think about putting a good arrangement together for not just young performers, folks, but professionals. I was working with Adam Manis recently, who's the arranger for St. Louis Symphony, and he reminded me of something that it's easy to forget, which is you'd be amazed what great musicians can do when you give them something simple to play. So just because he's writing for the St. Louis Symphony does not mean that he's writing the hardest stuff. He says when you give them simple music, they will do magic with it. So it's a reminder, a lot of times people think writing is like proving that you can use a bunch of ink and write some crazy stuff and that you're smart. And if you're writing music to prove to you're smart, you should probably stop it because the audience won't connect with that. Audiences like to hear stuff that you feel, and it's important for you. I talk about this a lot with improv with students. Play what you feel, not what you're trying to show. And it's the same when you're writing. If you write from something that you believe in and you have an honest reason to write this music, I think your audience generally picks up on that goodwill. In terms of nuts and bolts, I want to talk about simple strategies that can help you put together good arrangements for your group. Simple techniques that also work for professionals. I'm going to start with a big band chart, but it also applies. I use these same principles for an orchestra chart I just did. We did this recording session with the St. Louis Symphony, and it was some of the charts that I wrote. It was the musicians from the St. Louis Symphony that put into a chamber group, and it was 4 strings and 4 horn players and rhythm section and vocals. So you've got these 4 horn players that are pretty powerful, and then you've got 4 strings, which are very soft, and how to balance those out. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the second session. But the principles are fundamental. If you write good charts, it will usually sound good. I would say, in general, don't put somebody on an island. If you have a great bass line, give it to the baritone sax player as well, or give it to trombone 4. Don't leave people in a situation where they are probably by themselves. If it's a good part, it'll sound good most of the time, doubled with somebody else. That's one thing to think about. Just generally arranging is, if you write something for, even with a professional group, if you got an ensemble of 12 or 15 musicians on stage, let's say it's like a mixed ensemble, why are you writing a trombone solo? When you could probably write that for both trombones, or trombone and tenors will give you a really beautiful sound. So think about, in general, as a principle, double or triple things, where you can. It's not absolute, okay, but it's a good rule of thumb to start with. If you have a great bass line, why not put that in the left hand of the piano? If the trombones are playing or comping together, playing a chord, why aren't the tenors doubling that if possible? It's sort of like a way to build from the ground up, because another thing I believe in is you can always delete stuff, but it's a lot harder to add tenors later to the trombone part. And even more recently, I've gotten into more and more of writing cues for people to play. If the French horn isn't there, then play this cue. That gives you an out. You've got the cue written in case it doesn't sound good by itself. Or what if the French horn player gets sick right before the concert? So in a sense, as an arranger, you're trying to build a strategy to be successful no matter what happens. For example, I had a scenario where a singer couldn't sing a couple weeks before a show. Well, I had the chart built up, and I could just change the key for another singer, and to be specific, I had a couple different singers because of COVID. I could flip the chart to a male voice instead of female, as a backup plan. So that philosophy of, as the arranger, you're kind of trying to prepare for the worst case scenario, because something will always go wrong when you have a group of 20 musicians or 5. But it's the larger the number of people, the more likely that somebody doesn't show up or somebody gets sick. I would say in the last couple of years, somebody's had COVID or a car accident before every single concert. So you have to have that philosophy in mind as a backup plan. Like, how do I write stuff that has a lot of options and scenarios to be successful, to prevent one person from wrecking a song because they're not there? Or what if the trombone player is never going to be able to play it? Who else is going to help this trombone find their pitch? When you use those backup plans, you find that you prevent things from going off the rails in a concert, because there's enough. It's like double and triple checked. Can the trumpet be doubled with the tenors or the altos. You know what I mean? It doesn't just help your ensemble and the performance, but if you double your saxophone parts with the trumpets, guess what? The trumpets can hear their notes sooner. So you spend less time sort of dictating pitches to trumpet players, and you spend more time getting down the road and the creative part of what you're trying to do. Let me start. I wanted to show you guys a chart I did on La Vie en Rose, a classic Edith Piaf song from the 20s or 30s. And I think it'll give you some great ideas into thinking about arranging. And like, I'm going to try and, just point out like simple approaches that will help you think about what a big band chart is, because with this approach, I think you'll feel like you understand how you could do it over a weekend or something. It does take time, but it's super rewarding when you write something well and you get to hear that performed for the next couple years. There is a longevity to it. There's a crunchiness at the beginning, like, man, this takes a lot of work. But when you get faster, it takes less and less work. Today I could probably do a big band chart by tomorrow night if I had to, whereas when I did my first chart, it took a semester or so, right, in jazz arranging class. The more you do it, you start to learn shortcuts and you learn to repeat yourself in a way that takes less time. The first thing I wanted to say is don't think about writing a big band chart. Think about writing 4 or 5 voices within an octave. John Williams kind of uses this technique to some extent. In his orchestra arranging, it's always an 8-step. From what I understand, I've always heard that he writes with an 8-staff piece of paper, so that if it's not on those 8 staffs, like, it doesn't matter that much, right? And for jazz band writing, you can think of it as writing your trumpets in 1 octave and the trombones the octave below. So it's an 8-part voicing, and the saxophones kind of spread out and double things that are important. Where people get in trouble and write, if you're coming from like a marching band arranging style or concert band, is sort of doubling the wrong things. You don't want to like sort of double the third of your chord too much, because it'll stick out. Like, you really actually want to kind of suppress the major third of the chord or the minor third, because it can kind of take over. You don't want it to be as loud as everybody else. But think about writing as like 4 or 5 voices within an octave. And if you get that octave right, then everything below it and around it in the rhythm section is going to become a great chart. You don't want to think about trying to write in like with your trombones on the bottom of the register and the trumpets way up high, and it doesn't make any musical sense most of the time, and I think that's maybe where concert band would go in a different direction than writing for jazz band. To me, jazz band is the first step is to write things super tight. Then, of course, you can spread it out and use the range of your ensemble, but you have to think about it like a 4-note piano voicing, just from with 2 hands together, basically. Most of the time in your big band, like the lead trumpet is going to be your leader of the group. He's the leader of the melody, the leader of the sort of chord stack. If the lead trumpet's not playing, then your alto player is going to maybe be the second in command or the lead trombone, depending on how you want to break it down in sections. That's the traditional hierarchy, right? If you go like back to the beginning of big band writing, trumpet 1 most of the time played the top. And altos in the early days would get up tight next to the trumpet parts. Now, the modern style, it's definitely a little bit lower. So the older style, you might have the altos doubling the trumpet, so you get that really bright, early Duke Ellington style, like Duke Ellington from the 20s. You'd have the altos up there in a really tight harmony with the trumpet. So it's really really jumps through the speakers. We don't do that as much today. For 90% of your big band writing, the trumpets are in the top, and then the alto starts on trumpet 3 at best and kind of comes down, and then the trombones are in the lower octave. This chart I'm going to show you has a lot of simple techniques. Let's dive in there and look at stuff. I just wanted to kind of point out, it's a nice recording of the ensemble. You can't hear the vocalist too well, but that will kind of work for our scenario here, because we're really kind of looking at the arranging more than the vocal part. The vocalist was on the far side of the club, so the speaker she was coming out of doesn't really pick up as well. But simple techniques here. The first thing I'll say here, so I can put this on full screen, it doesn't hurt. Where's this? This is just like a what we call like a verbal sketch or written schematic. This is basically an outline of what's going to happen in the chart. It's great to put this down so you know what you're trying to do. Whenever you open up Sibelius or Finale, it's real easy to get lost in like, what am I trying to do? Because the computer has all these empty like bars there, and your first instinct is to just like start putting stuff in measures, you know what I mean? And you start writing from left to right. That is a huge danger with Sibelius and Finale, is that they try and convince you to just, like, the visual look of it says like, just write stuff over here and to put, think of it spatially. But what you want to think about is the big picture of like the outline of the song. Like, what is the whole thing I'm trying to feature here? Am I featuring a vocalist? Am I featuring a trombone section? Am I featuring the saxophones? Pick one, pick something, like, at least to start off with. You don't want to feature all of your sections on every song. You don't want to feature, have a ton of trombone charts. Most arrangers will write one for the features trombone section, the next one's a vocal, and then the next chart they write will feature the saxophones or tenor battle or the trumpet sections playing the melody together, something like, so to have like a concept. There's not many sort of simple charts that don't make a decision quickly about what they are. In this chart, I wrote out this schematic goal, or like schematic thing of like, what was I trying to get at in the chart? So the intro just starts, this was written in a Count Basie style. The intro starts with the 4 bars of drums, which would be typical in a Basie chart. It's a shuffle more than it is straight ahead. So I'm taking La Vie en Rose, the French classic, and making it into more of a hip, bassy kind of party song, Saxophones play the intro. There's a send-off or like a big fall, then there's a break. This part was actually pretty tricky in rehearsal. A little drum break, and then the vocals start as a surprise pickup to the form. What else is in here that I should mention? There's a little key change in here, and today you can make it. It's interesting. You can have a key change for any reason or non-reason. We rehearsed it in one key, and then it was too high for the vocalist, but the alto player loved the changes in that key. So I said, well, this is like early Basie style. There were key changes back then. If you look at 1 O'Clock Jump, there's big old traditional key changes that were kind of borrowed from or descendant from Dixieland and ragtime and everything else, where we had on march form, where we still had different keys in a song. Today, jazz is mostly, more often than not in one key throughout. But in the early years, you could have 2 or 3 keys. So I said, hey, I'm going to leave the alto key solo changes where they were, and then change the rest of this chart for the vocalist. And it worked out great because it was like a minor third off. It's kind of a cool little surprise. This chart is fun. I would say in terms of writing the chart, it's nice to use to do a vocal chart, because the vocal, it's a lot faster to write a chart for a vocalist, I find, than to write a straight instrumental chart, because you have less bases to cover. The vocalist is handling the melody, and they're sending information, like the style of that person is going to give you a lot of direct instructions about how to work around me, you know? When you've got a big band and a vocalist, you definitely want to figure out how to stay out of the way of the vocalist. Most of the times in a rehearsal, if you have something's not going well, it's because something's getting in the way of the vocal. It's not because, I don't know, that's just the primary reason. And so in this chart, it's rare that anybody is playing when the vocal is singing, you know? So most of the time what you're writing is comping. You're comping with the trombones, you're comping with the saxophones, and you're filling in the space when the vocalist isn't doing anything, for the most part in this chart. Or they're playing pads and long notes to just kind of stay down and stay out of the way. All right. Let's check it out. This was just my little sketch of what I was trying to do. It's kind of detailed. You don't even have to be this detailed. I would just encourage you to say, you know, write down on your notepad, this is a trombone feature chart. This chart will have a drum fill at the beginning, and this chart will feature a tenor solo with background riffs. Like, that little information will hold you to it as you kind of get bogged down in it, and remind you when you come back to it, because you're not going to write this chart in one pass. You need to think about, I'm going to write this chart in like probably 3 or 4 4-hour stretches. And so you need to plan for the fact that you're not going to remember what you were doing all the time, and you want to come back to it. Okay. Let's check it out, and I'll point some things out as we go.
So I'll give you one bar in front of the adaptation. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Right, so let me just back that up. Oops. So the check it out, the baritone, the bass trombone, and the bass are all playing the same riff, which is 5-1, and then most of the ensemble pops on the chord on the upbeat. Saxophones play the melody, and then the trumpets kind of join the melody, and they play a quote from April in Paris as a twist and a bassy reference here. But again, I'm using my trumpet sparingly. The saxophones you can wear out. You can play, write saxophones all day. Trombones are somewhere in between. But you can, you write like the bulk of your lines in the saxophones, and then you kind of use the trumpets to accent what's really important or underline it in a sense. Also, for the drum solo, I just wrote drum solo, and then I gave him the hits. A lot of times big band charts fail because you don't give the drummer good information. I wrote the bass line out for the bass player in this moment. I want him to play this specifically, rather than just playing the roots of the chords. The piano and the guitar have the comping that goes with the saxophone riff. They're just echoing that, and they have this, the piano and the guitar have the chords that support what the trumpets are playing. And it's not hard for them to play. It's pretty specific. The only thing I would say that makes this a little bit more advanced here, that you could give this to a college band and they're probably okay, but because I didn't write the voicings for the piano and guitar, that would sort of push it out of high school chart writing. If I were to redo this chart, I would give the piano a voicing, and I would give him the chord symbol on top, him or her, right? Next part, let's listen to that one more time. Just the intro send off. you hear how the vocalist actually sounded louder in the room, of course. Right here, it's a little soft. But another thing here is this this little riff. Ba ba da ba 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 da ba. I kind of generated this on my own, sitting around the piano, just goofing around with it. But I would say this: it's going to be very disciplined. Like it's going to happen for the whole chart, to the fact that it becomes, it's like a inside joke for the band. You know, this riff, ba ba da ba, 3 4 1 2, ba ba do ba, 3 4 1 2 3, ba ba dee bop, the ba bebop. It's not just a riff, like it's going to be the topic of the whole piece. It helps you stay focused, and it helps you pick a lane and just whatever riff it is, develop something rather than showing everybody that you can write 20 different riffs. Nobody cares. Like what they do care about is if it has a storyline, and this little line is sort of a story for me. It's just like something I was goofing around with, but this piece will explore that continuously, and it gets more and more aggressive as the story goes on behind the vocalist. I'll just back it up a little bit.
Hold me close and hold. This is and roses. When you kiss me inside, and though I was
Right, so trombones are killing it here. Actually, like one of my favorite recordings of anything I wrote. Like, and this was just a live night. Like that's what I always come back to this chart, and I'm like always happy about what I got from it, even though it's just a little Zoom recorder. The trombones are mashing these little upbeats here. Simple stuff. This chord here, what do we got here? It's a D minor chord. Bass bone has the D. Trombone 3 has the F. Trombone 2 here has an A, and it looks like the trombone 1 has the C. It's just a D minor chord straight up. Now, something I'll say is with minor chords, it's funny. You can write the chord straight up and it'll sound pretty good. If this was a major chord, you could not, right? You don't want to have like G major in root position in a jazz band. It'll just sound hokey most of the time. Of course, it happens if you have multiple chords passing or situations, but it's unique. I would say it's sort of unique to minor, that you can have the chord just sit right downtown with the root in the bottom, right? Because and it's the same with dominant chords, it can be a little weird too. Also, you don't want to have the dominant chord with the root in the root position. It sounds like boogie woogie or rock and roll or something like that. All right, but I gave the trombones this riff, and the guitar player and the piano, they're just going to kind of get out of the way. Like they'll comp, but they hear the trombones chucking away like that with like a really hard rhythm, they're going to like kind of stay out of there and hopefully let them do it. You can see in the middle of the screen here, the saxophones and the trumpets hit on the and a 4. So it's, again, use your trumpet sparingly. And that's just an extension. Like if you look at the trumpet part from the bottom, 4th trumpet is D. Well, then what do we got? E, F, A. D, E, F, A sits on top of that G7 chord. No, I'm sorry. B, E, F, A. It's a nice little piano voicing for G7, not in root position. The bass player is playing the G, right? So then the trumpets are playing B, E, F, A. If it sounds good on piano, it will probably sound good in a big band. It's sort of a different conversation, but your voicings and getting the chord out of root position is basically important, and you have to kind of use these jazz voicings with have a mix of 3rd and 4ths. And let me just back it up again. You can kind of hear the trombones going after it. Another important thing here is that even though we have a bar line, a lot of arrangers make the mistake of putting the chord on beat 1 instead of, like, you can cheat in jazz and the chords should hit on the and a 4 over the bar line into the D7, or so. Does that make sense? You don't have to wait until the downbeat to change chords. You actually want to anticipate the chords because it gives it more momentum. So even though there's D minor on the downbeat, I could just as well think about that being D minor on the and of beat 4. It gives your chart so much more momentum than trying to just if you play G7 for the full 2 bars and then D minor, it's kind of flat-footed. It doesn't move forward, because on jazz, a lot of times, if this is the quarter note, 1, 2, 3, 4, pow, that anticipation is the next chord. It's before the bar line. And it's important sort of gesture to use is the anticipation of the chord with the actual chord you're going to.
And though I'm tired, I see the and roses. When you press me to your heart.
Like right here, saxophones are in the break here, but then they're out of the way when the vocalist is singing these words, press me to your heart. They're responding here in the break. Vocalist sings, respond. Sense of humor here, like conversation. Big band vocal chart is, to me, and if you sort of Frank Sinatra tradition of charts and everybody else, and Billy May and Sammy Nestico, who this chart is kind of an homage to, it's a conversation. Like there's a soloist who's the vocalist talking, and the band is kind of sniping back and forth with the vocalist. And then finally the big band comes out of the shell and has like a shout chorus somewhere in the chart. But it's this fun, like playful relationship. Simple voicings here in the saxophones. This is a concert chart, by the way. So you don't have to transpose anything, but you got D here in the alto, C, A, G, E, kind of the upper structure of this C6 chord. It's voiced pretty low to stay out of the vocal range. It's got a nice little crescendo written in here. This doesn't do anything without a crescendo. You know, this note here is not short. The next bar over, that's not short if you don't make it short, you know? So nowadays I would encourage you to try and put an articulation on every note, you know, and you'll find that your performers get there better, even professionals, because if you have 4 quarter notes in a row, you're gonna waste 5 minutes debating whether you want these 4 quarter notes to be long or long, short, short, long, or accented, long, marcato. Just put a line on it or put a dot on it, and you will get a better performance immediately. A lot of times, young arrangers don't save enough time for going back and editing your parts or making sure your articulations are super clear. You don't want there to be a debate because you just lost control of the conversation. As an arranger, you have a vision for the piece, hopefully, right? And I'm a very open-minded rehearsal guy where if somebody brings something up, I'm totally willing to listen to it. But in the arranging aspect of it, you should come with a clear vision. The sharper that vision is, the better chance you have of getting a good performance out of it. Even with professionals, you just have to give them great information. Okay, and back it up. Let's just listen to that one more time. You kind of hear the saxophones, how they respond to the vocalist, and with sort of a snarky attitude. Tenors and the trombones double. Right now that we talk about this conversational aspect, now here come the saxophones and the trombones. I actually didn't want to bring the trumpets in yet. I wanted to feature altos above the bones, all kind of just singing in harmony here. Simple voicing. Look at the melody. You have the alto playing the lead melody here. Saxophone, first alto 2 is just down a third. And, you know, I would encourage you to just think logically. This part is all in C major, right? So, like, if you're in a hurry, just just put some notes down and try it out and see what happens. Like, I don't know how to say this, but inner voice, like, you can spend all day on inner voices, and I would just tell you to keep the melody in the top part, keep it at least a third away from the lead voice so that people can hear the melody. If you write a harmony note next to the melody, it's lost now. Nobody can hear the melody. If there's a second, minor second, even a minor third here is a little close, but people will still pick it out. They'll still know that who's playing the melody. Also, what's going on in the bones, check it out. The bones are in unison with the saxophone. So this alto lead, but it's shared with the bone. Alto has the lead for style, but the bone is playing the same stuff. I wrote the saxophone part in 4 voices and flipped it straight down to the bones. It's exactly 1 octave below the bones. This is a Sammy Nestico technique he used in the military bands and then later on in the Basie band, where you write your 4 parts that I talked about in 1 octave and then and then basically copy it to the bones and transpose it down an octave. It sounds killing. Check it out. I'm not bragging on myself. I'm bragging on Nestico's technique. 1 octave. This could also be the trumpets instead of the saxophones, and then the bones in the octave below in the exact same 4 notes. Check it out. Cool. So it's 4 voices within an octave. From that C to the bottom note of the saxophones, they are not going to leave that octave. The baritone could obviously go down an octave, but you want to think about it as a 1 octave range, and then just flip that, take that exact material and put it down the octave. That's how you can write a big band chart in 2 or 3 days. 2 days, you could do that. You write your 4 voices, then you're going to double everything in the octave below. Right? Little on the screen here, at the end of this phrase, we got a little unison run. Great for fast stuff. A little unison gets everybody in the ensemble engaged. You don't want to overuse it, but if you check out this little like saxophone riff here, the fact that they come up together, it creates like a vibe in your ensemble. Like everybody's looking forward to whether they can play that together when they get there. It's sort of like the social dynamic, like of like getting your players to play well. If you give them a couple little unison things where they have to like those kind of things will tighten people up socially in your big band. Let's back it up and check it out. And then back to the bone. Remember I talked about 10 minutes ago, I talked about the key change. So this chart goes to a totally different key, just to this version of it doesn't, but it goes back to A major for the alto solo, I think. Check it out. You'll hear the big key change. It doesn't make any sort of, it sounds perfectly fine, but I guess my lesson here is with key changes nowadays, you don't have to have any rhyme or reason. You just kind of go somewhere and it sounds new and different. now here's a important part. Little altos blazing. Now the trombones come back with that. Remember we talked about that little idea, bop, 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 bop. Now they're going to start to shred on that idea. They can really kind of play out in this. It's behind the alto solo, and it'll kind of push him forward as a soloist. The riff is unison until the last note. Simple little technique, unison, 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 chord. Unison, 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 chord. It gives it a little bit of a splat in the face of the soloist. The next part here, we kind of get into this sort of tribute to Louis Armstrong, and I just wrote the trumpet melody in unison. Don't overthink your trumpet section. Don't ask too much of them. If they're a younger group, give them, instead of giving somebody a trumpet solo, why not write, this big unison for all 4 trumpet players? It helps the younger players grow up a little faster, and it gives the lead players something to sort of lead with. Behind them, we've got saxophones and pads, simple little pads here in the alto. Voicings are low too, folks. Don't voice your pads high. You see how low the alto one is? This is a concert score, but he would be up on the A in the middle of his staff. Let's check it out. Trumpets in unison, playing this Louis Armstrong phrase from his version of Levy and Rose. Saxophones, a big long crescendo. Again, if I wrote this note here, if I wrote that saxophone note without a dynamic, it's useless. But as a player, it's a lot of fun to just sit on a really long crescendo and try and get better as a group doing that as a section. You'll find that your players are into it. They're excited to try and grab a crescendo together. So you got a bunch of different things happening. The trombones are taking a break. The saxophones are playing this long crescendo together. Trumpets are working on their unison together, and the rhythm section is just kind of trucking along. I'll back it up just a clip. Right? That creates some energy and some space. The trombones are back with their little one-trick riff. Bop, bop, bop. The little rhythm groove is back to kind of punch the trumpets and move the chart forward. But it's not new material. It's stuff that happened before. It's just a little bit more aggressive, and that little riff that they're going to play is a little assertive and combative, I would say. If you think about it, I felt this when I was writing this chart, which was saxophones are doing one thing, trombones are doing something different, trumpets are doing something different. And each of those things that they're doing develops throughout the chart in its own ecosystem. The trombones don't suddenly start playing the trumpet riff or anything, or the melody. The trombones have their own riff in their block, and that riff will become more and more aggressive. The trumpets are never sort of getting down in that fight with them. They're above the fray, the melody's kind of floating, but the trombones down below are more and more, by containing their range of what they're doing, you're creating more energy just naturally. They're also going to drive that chart, because if they're young players, that riff that they're playing in the beginning is, you're giving them more time to become a section. In a sense, it's like taking a riff and rehearsing it for 30, 40 minutes. the concept of like a limited rhythmic vocabulary of this chart allows young players to pop more. You know what I mean? It allows them to focus on groove more than content by stretching them out with with longer lines or something like that. They're just focused on you know, sort of like being the offensive line of the football team here. They're just punching the chart. Let me back it up a little bit so you can hear the contrast with the trumpets and then the trombones coming in underneath them. So that was like the sort of long trumpet crescendo leading up to the return of the vocalist. You know what I mean? The story has to build itself and it has their own conversation leading back to the vocalist coming back in. In the shout chorus here, simple voicing basically. Think of it like an accordion also. If your voicing is really high and it's wide open like an accordion, then the trumpets are going to spread out, okay? And the saxophones will kind of fill in the gaps, but as you get higher, the voicing gets wider. If the trumpets are playing pretty low, which they are here, the voicing is super tight. It's just that 4-note thing within the octave, and the trombones are right underneath them at that point. And the saxophones are everybody's kind of together in the same neighborhood, right? So you get a really intense sound out of the big band when you keep the trumpets low, especially for a younger group. They will not sound better playing higher. Even, you know, they'll even professional group, like these guys are a mix of, in this ensemble is a mix of doctoral students and master's degree students and everything. So it's, you know, professional level, and it still sounds great low. It doesn't have to be high to sound good at all. Check it out one more time. The shout chorus is not a high shout chorus. It's low, but the harmony is so dense that it just punches right through the chart. Stuff happened there. What should we talk about here? Let me back it up just a little bit. Simple writing overall. Okay, so little tongue-in-cheek quotation here of Les Miserables, because it was like a French tune. I was like, I'm going to throw Les Miserables in there. Vocalist sings, and then the band plays Les Miserables. Like it makes no sense other than it's just sort of like having fun. You know what I mean? Not a real complex harmony. Kind of thick but low. And then this part's just great. This was the one part where I did write harmony on this really fast stuff. and that's sort of the exception rather than the rule. You don't want to write like 16th notes all day within 4-part harmony, but if you have like a short burst, it's a great little surprise when I use it, because we're going into a key change here. Again, trumpets, when we get to this key change, the trumpets are playing at pretty much a high school level here, a high school range. F, E flat, A, G, not very high for them. What else can we say about this part? Just it's thicker because we're at the end. There is a little bit, the harmony is a little bit denser because we're getting to the end of this show, sort of, in this song. Let's back it up one more time. All right, so again, you heard a whole bunch of harmonies here, but let's check it out. Trumpets played A, C sharp, E flat, E, ba-ba-da-ba. Look, a little hip lick that I kind of wrote. And then, I don't know, it's it, but it's just like it's just a little fragment thing, like ba-ba-da-ba-da. And then the second trumpet, ba-ba-da-da. This is over a G7 altered chord, which, so again, first trumpet starts on the A, next guy starts on the G, next guy starts on the F, next guy starts on the D flat. This is just your G7 altered scale, which is your A flat melodic minor. Don't overthink it too much. I just liked this lick and then voiced it down into the scale, and I kept it within the octave. Then look at the saxophones, same exact material down the octave. Not in unison because it would be too bright, right? It could kind of help the trumpets, but generally, look, saxophones are down here, A, G, F. It's the same exact stuff as the trumpets, where the trombones are playing the exact same things that the saxophones are playing. That lets the saxophones can hear, the trombones can hear their note because the saxophones are playing it. Trumpets can hear their note because the saxophones are also playing it. And the saxophones will play their notes sooner than your trombone and trumpet players. So it gives them a reference point. This comes in with this new key change at letter M. We kind of drive through that. And then there is finally like the kind of bassy band screaming saxophones up high. It's kind of Marshall Royal tribute, or just a tribute to the bassy concept. That's kind of cool. Where I talked about voicing the trumpets in an octave and then doubling the saxophones the octave below. But for this part, I left the trumpets out and went to the screaming saxophone sound, which replaces the trumpets. If the trumpets doubled it, it would be too bright. It would be too many people playing high notes together, basically. But it sounds great for a moment of saxophone-ness here. Check it out. Cool. So that's the whole thing. Again, this is just an outro, little kind of movie theater ending. Ba 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 ba. Some triad stuff going up in the trumpets. Just typical Broadway / Hollywood type of ending. Trumpet ends on a high C. Most high school players, your first trumpet in high school can probably get up there. It doesn't make the chart better, but the last note of the trumpet part is probably the highest note of the piece, which is an older technique, to make the last note the most important one. People know when to clap. So I think that's about it for this chart. Again, keep it simple. Think about putting your trumpet, to overview what we talked about. Put your trumpets in an octave, then double them in the octave below in the saxophones or trombones. and that's a good start for putting together some big band charts. Don't write your G7 or G major. Don't write those in root position. Remember, the bass player is playing the roots. Nobody else really has to. You don't want to have the bass playing the root and have the trumpet. You know, as a general rule, you're using the rest of the ensemble to fill out the jazz chords and like to fill in all the potential other notes that can be there. Cool. So I hope that helps, and I appreciate being here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right, Dr. Carney, man, what an awesome session we've had today. Just breaking down the chord structure and just how you voice things. I mean, and how we break that down. I mean, it's so many moving parts and components to this.
Right.
It's vital that we know what to do. And you mentioned Sammy Nestico. I mean, he was the master arranger. And so many people use his techniques, and whether it's that, you know, it doesn't matter. I mean, we can all kind of gather some things by just dissecting how they did it. So I really appreciate how you went through there. You even mentioned, you know, high school players should be able to get here and how to double things in different voices. I mean, this was an amazing session, and I'm so happy that this is recorded and you can go back in our past archives and, you know, you can study this, pause it, check it out, take notes from here. And that's the powerful thing about what we're doing here with the Young Lions Master Virtual Session. So we want to thank you again for this session. We want to remind everyone, if there's a future topic you want us to talk about, or you can give us great feedback. Maybe you love this session and you want to tell us how much you really enjoyed it. You can email us, and we love hearing from our listeners and people that come in live and check out this session. You can email us at info@clearwaterjazz.com. And once again, that's info@clearwaterjazz.com. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, Dr. Carney, we thank you again. And I've been your host, Michael Kernodle. We hope to see you out there. Keep it swinging, everybody. Have an awesome day. Bye-bye.